Hey guys, this video is going to be the standard fix to the screen of death. It's going to be part 3 of 4. In the earlier video, I showed a detailed diagnosis to determine the screen of death, and this standard fix would be the standard fix based on the results from that diagnosis. So thanks for joining me today. I'm Canooga Combs, a lifetime bike enthusiast. I like to ride them, and I like to work on them. To summarize my earlier videos, part 1 and part 2 in this series, adjusting the connector pins and the regular connector cleaning did not work, as I highlighted in the first video of this series. And then from testing in the second video in this series, the battery's okay, the BMS switch is working properly, and the bike will turn on. So based on all of that, I know that the problem, it has to do with the connections. And further, I'm pretty sure that the problem is that the copper cups on the battery and or the male BMS switch receptors inside the frame are still corroded. So I feel pretty confident that the male and female battery connector pins and slots are most likely not the problem, as they were adjusted and cleaned. And if you want to see how to do that, go to the first video in this series. So basically, there are two ways that that this problem can be fixed. Number one, get the corrosion cleaned up, and this is also known as, or AKA, the standard fix, or permanently close the loop by hot wiring the wires inside the battery that go to the copper cups. And that would be bypassing the BMS switch, and that's also known as the alternative fix. In this video, I'm going to go over the standard fix, and part 4 of 4 in this series, I'm going to go over the alternative fix. Before we go any further here, a word of caution. When you're dealing with these batteries and the connection to the batteries, you're dealing with some very high voltages. And please do not try these procedures unless you have the appropriate electrical experience. You know, just to highlight, first of all, the battery is high voltage, and there's a risk of shock and a risk of arcing, electrical arcing. I've shown in the far left here, number 1, the tag on the battery, and it shows that it's a 48-volt battery. That's high voltage, and you just want to make sure that when you're dealing with the copper cups and the female battery connector pin slots on that battery, that you're very aware of that, and certainly don't stick anything in there that could cause arcing or could shock you. The other thing to be aware of, and a big dose of caution, is the motor capacitor. Even when there's no battery in that bike, there's high voltage and a risk of shock and a risk of arcing. I've shown in picture number 2 here, where I've actually connected up alligator clips to the male battery connecting pins, even though the battery is not in the bike. And as you can see in number 3, that even without the battery in the bike, it's still registering 42.9 volts on my multimeter. So, you just want to be very, very careful in dealing, with these battery and battery connectors, even when the battery's not in the bike, because there is high voltage involved, and there's a risk of getting shocked or a risk of electrical arcing. So just proceed ahead with a great deal of caution here. Also, just to make sure everybody's clear on the terminology, I want to explain exactly what the copper cups are. If you start in the far left side of the screen, that's a battery out of a Dengfu e10. And if you follow the orange arrow, I'm looking at the end of the battery where the battery connects to the bike. Follow the blue arrow and the white arrows. I've expanded those, the end of the battery, so you can get a good picture. And then from the end of the battery in the far right, I'm showing that there are 2 copper cups. I'm calling them copper cups. copper cup number 1 and copper cup number 2. And the cleanliness of these cups is critical for the bike to work properly and in this case to eliminate the screen of death. The second thing to focus on are the male BMS switch receptors. And once again, starting at the left, if you look at the down tube on the bike and go to the bottom of the down tube, as I'm showing at the end of the white arrow, there's a battery cover. Once the battery cover is removed and the battery is out, as I'm showing at the end of the blue arrow, you'll have a cavity. And when you look inside that cavity following the orange arrow, you'll see the point where the battery connects to the bike. And then following the red arrows, there are 2 little pins, and they're easy to miss. But those 2 little pins, as I'm showing in the far right, are the male BMS switch receptors, labeling them number 1 and number 2. The wires leading to those receptors go up to the BMS switch on the side of the bike. And so the cleanliness and the proper operation of these receptors is critical to eliminate a screen of death and to ensure that the Dengfu e10 is working properly. Now, the copper cups, when the battery is inserted in the bike, what will happen is those copper cups will match up against those male BMS switch receptors. And those male BMS switch receptors they're spring activated, and so when the connector cups go up against those receptors, the spring will cause the receptors to be continuously pressing against those copper cups, and that electrical connection and that constant electrical connection is critical. Now, the first thing that I need to do to implement the standard alternative is to make sure that the copper cups are good and clean. I'd cleaned them earlier in video number 1 of this series, but obviously that cleanliness was not good enough. So I went in and did some research and determined that in this situation, I probably needed a good cleaner or deoxifier, and I found this deoxit, which a lot of people were using in similar situations. I'm showing it in picture number 1 here. And in picture number 2, I'm using the little brush from the bottle and just putting a little bit of this solution on the copper cup and spreading it around. And then in picture number 3, I'm taking an eyelash brush and sort of scrubbing, if you will, the copper cups with that deoxit solution to make sure they're thoroughly clean. And I think doing that will ensure that those are about as clean as they can be. Part 2 of the standard alternative is to clean the male BMS switch receptors and to make sure that the spring on those receptors is working properly. So once again, I'm taking the deoxit, I'm applying it to the receptors in number 2 with the brush in the bottle. Then I'm taking that eyelash brush and going around and making sure that they are thoroughly clean and that the solution is really been properly applied to those receptors. And then in step 4, I'm using a piece of plastic to go in and press on those male BMS receptors to make sure that the spring is working properly. Now, when I first started doing this, they were a little gritty, but once I mashed them some and with a little lubrication from that deoxit, they seem to work much better. And so it's very important not only to get them clean, but to make sure the spring's working. Also, once again, a word of caution here. You do not want to stick anything metal in here because if you're sticking something metal in here, it's very easy to hit those battery connector pins. And as I highlighted earlier, those will carry a charge even though the battery's not in the bike. So don't stick anything in here except plastic, and be very careful as a part of this process. But once I've put the deoxit on them, as you can see, I have a good bright copper finish on the copper cups. And on the right side, I have a good clean and lubricated, if you will, male BMS switch receptors. And at that point, I inserted the battery in the bike and it was resuscitated. When I went in and stuck the battery in the bike, mashed the BMS switch, and then mashed the controller button, as you can see, I got the happy screen from Bafang, meaning that the motor was working and the screen of death had been resolved. So cleaning those cups and the standard fix, resolved the issue. But going forward, I plan to remove the battery often. I think if you leave the battery in the bike because of all the dirt that's coming in there and the water, as the battery sits in the bike, you'll increase the chance of corrosion. So I would at least remove the battery every 2 or 3 times that you ride the bike. And number 2, I plan to try to clean the contacts with an anti-corrosive about every 100 miles. I think that would be helpful and is necessary on the Dengfu e10. Third, I'm going to avoid applying dielectric grease as I believe there's too much dirt entering through the battery door. And I think if you put dielectric grease on the contacts in the battery, you're going to actually cause there to be, as the dirt builds up, that grease will attract the dirt. And what will happen is you'll actually get a counterintuitive result. The dielectric grease will actually make it less likely that you'll maintain a good connection with the battery. So in my next video, which will be part 4 of 4 in this series, I'm going to explain why the alternative fix, may eliminate the need to do these steps. So in part 4 of 4 of this series, I'm going to explain what the alternative fix is, why people are doing it. And as you can see, when I explain that, some of these items would no longer be necessary. So anyway, I hope I've given you guys something to think about, and I will see you at the top.